Hi, this is Shelby, and this is my presentation on ancient Roman art. So the origins of the Roman art, as well as Roman culture, came from Etruscans. They also took a little bit from the Greeks, as we know they did with conquests of Greece, and how they took parts of their culture that they liked and tried to make it into their own. But then around 200, the Romans really started to develop their own kind of artistic style and accomplishments. So there's a few different main types of Roman art, and it's architecture, historical reliefs, portrait busts and statues, funerary sculpture and reliefs, and paintings. So we'll start with architecture, and that's probably one of the greatest contributions that the Romans had to art history. They didn't invent the art, but they mastered the use of it and kind of expanded on the concept to make it really great. So they started with the Roman arch. And the key to this was this keystone right here in the middle that kind of bared some of the weight and dispersed it throughout these other stones off to the side so it wasn't coming straight down. You also see these reinforcements down here and these footers that really helped keep that weight. So they were able to do so much with these arches, like make aqueducts. So you can really see the keystone right here in the footers, that they would really bear that weight, and they were able to transport water from reservoirs outside the city right into the city. So that was really awesome. Another thing that they did was build the famous Colosseum. So you can see the arches all around it, and aqueducts would bring water into the Colosseum to reenact naval battles. They would have gladiatorial games, and you can also see there's three different kinds of columns as you go up the Colosseum. So down here at the bottom we have the Doric columns, which are kind of plain. They don't have any ornamentation on the top, they're just kind of flat. The second level you see the Ionic columns, which have this really cool scroll work at the top. And then at the top you see the Corinthian column, which had some really awesome like leafing and just really cool decoration. Another great form of architecture is the Pantheon, although it was derived from the Greek Parthenon. As you can see, the triangular top to it is very Greek along with these columns, but the Romans added on this dome to the back of theirs, which was pretty much, they just used the concept of a lot of arches, put together in a circle, which was a pretty cool accomplishment. And they left this light at the in the middle called an oculus, which shone down on sculptures and whatever kind of cool stuff they had down there. Another cool thing that they did was historic relief, also not invented by the Romans. It was invented by Stone Age men, and it wasn't even done as well as the Greeks. The Greeks had some really really cool reliefs that they did from Greek mythology that were just super decorative, and but the Romans, what they did was they used them to record history rather than tell mythology and all that. So we see that on the Trajan's column, which is what we're looking at right here. It's 125 feet, created between 106 and 113, so it's a little past what we're talking about right now in class. But it's a Doric style column, and you see wrapped around the whole thing is stories of the triumphs of the Emperor Trajan in Rome. So you see how it kind of wraps around the whole thing right up to the top. And there's inscriptions on the bottom that are actually in what is now Trajan font that you can use on the computer and whatever. Another great one is Marcus Aurelius' column, but it's only 100 feet, still pretty tall, but not quite as tall as Trajan's, and it's made of marble, and it's kind of the same thing, tells of all the triumphs of Marcus Aurelius. Then we have portrait busts and statues. They're usually made of marble or bronze, mostly of emperors, leaders, people of power, patricians. And they were created in bulk and sent to all parts of the world, mostly with emperors, just to show how powerful they are. It's believed that they're Etruscan style because Greek style busts usually are just the head and the neck. They don't have the shoulders on them, and Roman busts usually did have shoulders on them. So here's an example. It's of Cato the Elder, who we've talked about in class, made in the 1st century. The Romans really did get very realistic with their portraiture and busts. You can see all of the lines, all of the wrinkles, rather than the Greek versions, which were very idealized and fancy and just made to look really cool. But the Romans, they wanted to be more realistic with their sculptures. So next we have religious and funerary reliefs. So around 200 BC, I believe, Rome turned from cremation practices to burial practices. So they used sarcophagi, and they became very high demand. So there were really 3 different types of sarcophagi that were made and used in Rome, and that was Metropolitan Roma, which were actually created in Rome, Attic style, which were created in Athens, and the Asiatic style, which were created in Asia Minor. They all kind of had different characteristics to them, but they were all used in Rome. They were all carved and decorated in some kind of way. The Etruscan style, or Attic style, usually featured full-length portraits of the deceased on the lid of the sarcophagi, and it's called Klein style. It usually had reliefs of Greek and Roman mythology, fruit, plants, battle scenes, hunts, really anything like that that would give it a really cool look to it, that would honor the deceased. The Asiatic style also was kind of separated by columns, so it would have maybe different scenes on it, rather than just one continuous scene. So this is an example of the Attic style with the Etruscan Klein style on top of the deceased reclining. On the bottom you see the battle scene that's going on, and then you also see some other embellishment and ornamentation down here at the bottom. They were usually just decorated on the front and on the 2 sides because they were put in a wall or up against a wall, so you wouldn't usually see the back of it anyways. Another great Roman advance is paintings. Again, they maybe even didn't do it as well as some other cultures, but they developed pretty much the landscape form of painting, and also an early form of linear perspective, which was then expanded in the Renaissance. They did a lot of panel paintings using tempera paint, which was pretty much just pigment mixed with a water-soluble binder, such as like an egg yolk or something like that. The colors weren't very vivid, not like the oil paintings that you see in the Renaissance. And they also had triumphal paintings, so it highlighted military success, kind of like what you saw on Trajan's column, but in a painting. This was done in fresco, which was applying paint and pigment to wet plaster, so these colors were even less bright than the tempera paint, and you had to do them pretty quick since you couldn't wait until the plaster dried. They're pretty easy to produce though, so there were lots of them around. In Pompeii, there were so many different types of paintings and art that were found preserved in the ashes, and so there's kind of 4 different styles from different time periods that were found in Pompeii. So this is the first style. It was kind of like a masonry style. It's just painted on walls to imitate marble or different kind of stone, just to give it a little bit of color. So these were applied to all walls in houses, and well, in houses that could afford them, just to give it a little bit of something extra. The second style is to create the illusion of extra space by painting pictures with lots of depth. You see kind of some of this linear perspective in here. It was mostly garden or landscape, just to kind of make it look like you were looking outside and that's what you were seeing. And they usually took up the entire wall. As you can see, it's got columns. You think that they're three-dimensional, but they're actually just painted on there just to give the illusion that you're looking out a window. This is the third style. It was more ornamental than the second style, but it didn't have as much illusion of depth. So you still kind of see this three-dimensional aspect here, but it's not an entire landscape or anything like that. It was divided into sections using columns, and they were very bright panels of color, just to give it a little something extra. If there was a scene, it was usually exotic. It had, real and imaginary animals, just all kinds of cool stuff on there. And the fourth style is a mixture of the second and third. So you have the illusion of extra space with this linear perspective here going to a point in the middle. But you also have the panels of color separated by columns. So it's kind of a little bit of everything. And the ornamentation kind of comes back with these columns and all the pretty cool things.